Good evening, everybody. Welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, where we talk everything prospecting, but particularly the prospects in the ABL, a 30-team dynasty league with a glorious 20 minor league spots per team for a total of 600 prospects, which gives us a lot to talk about. And this evening, I am joined by the owner of the ABL Milwaukee Brewers, Zach, who I'll introduce in just a second and get him on the show. Zach is a diehard Pittsburgh Pirates fan. I'm a St. Louis Cardinals fan, although the owner of the ABL Orioles. So we have a special NL Central discussion for tonight, although AL East and NL Central for terms of the ABL. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Zach, and you can compare his Bucks paraphernalia to my Cardinals paraphernalia. How you doing, Zach? Welcome to the show.
Oh, good, Steve. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and definitely happy and excited to talk. And I think we have pretty parallel outfits on, but I think your retro Cardinals jersey's got me beat there. I just got a free Friday T-shirt on here, so
that's all right. Free Friday T-shirts, that counts. That means you were at a ball game.
Yeah,
right. That was a good ballpark. I love PNC Park. It's a great stadium. And this is my Ozzie Smith batting practice jersey, which I'm very
nice.
fond of, right? It's got the retro 80s look, even though it was from the early 90s, I think, the jersey. And I've got my this is my oldest St. Louis Cardinals hat. It's like,
nice.
Yeah. And I see you have like an alt color Pirates hat. So
yeah,
tell me about that.
That's your newest or your oldest Cardinals hat. This is my newest Pirates hat.
Nice.
It might not be able to be seen in the light, but it's actually the Mother's Day hat from this year.
Oh, all right. So is it gray with pink little P?
Yes.
Nice. I like it. Oh, look at that. All right. That's solid.
I actually got it by winning the Pirates. I guess, on Twitter, they every so often they tweet out, retweet to win this signed baseball or win this hat. Like tonight tonight is a City Connect night for the Pirates. They unveiled that their jerseys and their hats, they had, retweet to win the hat. And even though I live in Buffalo, New York now, I haven't been to a game in a while, but I still occasionally when I catch those, I'll retweet, and that's how I got this. I actually won the competition. So 5 days later,
you didn't get a signed ball, but you got a Mother's Day hat.
It's brand newest one.
You'll take that. Absolutely. So I'll tell you a funny story before we get into prospecting, which I do want to talk with you about. I'm excited to have you on about Pittsburgh. I got stranded there coming back from on a business trip. So I was headed back to New York, and I was coming from Dallas. It was a crazy trip. Several years ago, there was a shooting in Dallas. So the night of the shooting, that was the night I landed. My court appearance got canceled the next morning because this horrible shooting in Dallas. So I finally get a flight out of Dallas, okay? Terrible rain, and I can't get home. So I get stranded in Pittsburgh, right? Now, Pittsburgh's an underrated city, all right? I happen to be very fond of Pittsburgh, but I was not in the mood. after everything had happened, I was like, I really just want to go home. I got to the hotel, and I didn't have any change of clothes. So on the way, when I get to the airport, and then, we got grounded there first, and then they canceled the flight. I was stuck overnight. Meanwhile, my wife is stuck with my 3 children, her stepchildren, taking care of them by herself. That was going over real well.
Oh,
anyway,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I get to I'm leaving the airport in Pittsburgh, and I got no clothes, right? So I had to go buy a Gregory Polanco T-shirt at the airport. This is when Polanco still had some, swag, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
So you're gonna see you have to picture this Cardinals fan the next day showing up to the airport in a Polanco T-shirt, just like killing it, right? I was so angry. The security people just let me right through. They were like, "No, we don't want to deal with him." Anyway, so I finally got rid of the Polanco T-shirt when I did a move recently. But
I was going to say the question is did you immediately burn that or
no? I can't have animosity to the Bucks. Just like it can't have animosity to them. But I grew up watching. A terrific 70s team with the striped hats and Tekulve and Stargell and all those dudes. They were a lot of fun. So I've always had like a soft spot in my heart for the Bucks. So it's fine. But I no longer have the Polanco jersey. the T-shirt.
I voluntarily bought a Polanco jersey along with several others, including like Kevin Newman and Chad Cole at a private store was like going out of business.
No,
a
go.
couple of years ago. I'm like, oh, $25 for some jerseys. So, and the shine had already gone off by then. And then later that year, it was when he was cut and went to Japan or Korea. I don't know.
Right. Whichever it was, he left the United States. Right.
He's
Right.
gone.
So, as the owner of O'Neill Cruz and the ABL, I forbid you from ordering any Cruz jerseys or T-shirts. Right? You just like kiboshed it. But listen, let's talk about prospecting in the show and why you're here. I can talk about real baseball all day as well. Um,
Absolutely. Same
so
here.
yeah, exactly, right. That's why we're doing this, right? So tell me a little bit about your dynasty experience, Zach, and how many leagues you're in, and kind of like how you're thinking about prospecting has evolved over time.
Sure. Yeah. So I've probably been playing fantasy baseball for ever since I was a teenager with some just my cousins or friends in Yahoo leagues, probably back to 99 or 2000. But I didn't really join any dynasty leagues or even keeper leagues. I want to say it was 2011. I joined a league that was at the time a 14-team league, and with several of my friends, different friends from high school or neighboring high schools had all gotten together. And one of my cousin's friends said, this is a great league to keep guys for multiple years. I'm like, this sounds great. And you get to keep 10 and you have 10 prospects. I'm like, this is even better because I've always kind of liked that stuff. I was the kid who on MVP Baseball 2005, I would go and I would print off the names of every minor league team, and I would try to name, because they were all fake names for the players in the minor league.
You go in and rename them. That's
I would go. Yeah, I was that nerd. So I would go and do that.
You're not a nerd, Zach. You're a dedicated baseball fan.
I'm a proud baseball nerd.
There you go.
Always have been.
All right, so that's up to 2005. All right, but back in 2005 and in 2011, you're in these leagues. So how many leagues are you in now?
Yeah, so right now I'm along with ABL. I'm in three other leagues. One of my longtime leagues closed up several years ago, and all of them are keeper in some capacity now. With baseball, it's almost impossible, I think, now to kind of, once you go dynasty, you never go back.
You got a little shout out from Dylan, who was on the show the last time about your naming the players. There you go.
That's right. Yeah, that was a good show last time too.
There you go. A little shout out for Dylan.
But yeah, it's almost like once you go keeper or dynasty, you can never go back. And even fan tracks now, I feel like once you get off doing a Yahoo league now just blows my mind. But they're all kind of different. I'm in two different 16-team leagues. One I've been in for probably 12, 13 years now, and another I've been in for the last 5 or so. But none of them are, of course, quite set up like the ABL. Where none of them are as big.
What is?
Not what is. It's what drew me to it. And Tommy, the Nationals owner, was in this league I was mentioning before. It was a 14-team league, then it turned to a 16-team league. And he's the one who said, "Hey, Zach, I found this league and I'm in this league, and I really think you would like to be in it." And once he said, it's 30 teams, I'm thinking, whoa, 16 was as far as I've ever been in. Even though I've definitely enjoyed my other leagues, but they weren't, the prospects in that league were only up to 14
per team, right?
And,
yeah, sure.
Yeah, and the other one, it could be unlimited, but you can only keep up to 40 overall players, including your big league roster every year. So it's kind of like a dynasty, but without contracts. Mm-hmm. So, but this is something that more simulates or emulates real life baseball as close as you can get to like be your own GM. And whenever Tommy told me about this, I said, I'm sold.
If there's ever an opening.
Yeah. So I was waiting for an opening, and I got considered for the Giants opening. Yeah, but Josh got that, and then the Brewers opened up probably just weeks later, and Duke contacted me, and I've been in it ever since, and it's taken up. I could definitely say it's taken up a little bit more of my time compared to the other leagues since then.
It takes real dedication. I think to be successful anyway, right? You can't mail it in the ABL.
No, no, you have to be to the point where we check our lineups probably way too much, and then I'm like, oh crap, I did this one, but I forgot to check my other.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of like abandoned leagues, like they're kind of neglected children. Right. Yeah.
You have your two favorites, and then this one might not get to go to college because you.
Right. Somebody has to pump gas. It's okay. Right. It's okay. All right. So you've been doing Dynasty or some version of Dynasty since roughly 2011, if I'm following at home here. And how is and ABL is fairly recent because it's only 3 years old. Sounds like you came in kind of towards the end of year one. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
You took over so like me, you came in and took over at a team that was abandoned. And by the way, thank you for all the owners who left the league that first year and opened up this wonderful opportunity. I mean, thank you.
You either joined right before me or right after me. Also, there was a couple of us who were
there
was a whole group of new ones. Yeah,
a whole slot of us came in,
yeah.
in that same wave as Josh. So how has your thinking about prospects evolved over time? And I'm sure it's evolved even more since being in the ABL because it's such a specialized league relative to others. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've always been someone who I've always liked dealing with prospects. Like I've collected baseball cards ever since I was 3 years old. And back in the 90s, they would put prospect cards as part of the real set. And now they don't do that anymore. But they still have prospect sets and everything. And I've long loved going on the MLB.com website from like Callis and Mayo. And back whenever it's 3 or 4 designs ago, much harder to maneuver around. And they would only have top 10 or top 20 of the teams. But now that it's up to, and there's so many more resources, even when you think about it, even compared to 10, 15 years ago. Baseball America was around, Baseball Prospectus was around, but there's so many other news sites. And now with Twitter, and there's so many, it's tough because you have to try to find out. And I know you've talked a lot about this already yourself with some of the prior shows, but how do you pick what sources and what you're interested in? And because prospecting is really a crapshoot anyway. It's always been a crapshoot. It will always be.
There's an element to it.
And the thing I've tried to come up with because I was just interested in it from a non-fantasy perspective for a while.
Yeah.
Part of it was admittedly for years and years and years being a Pirates fan, thinking, okay, whenever our team sucks and we trade at the deadline, who are these guys that we're going to get? And
you're forced to be a prospector, right?
who could we get for Jason Bay? Who could we get for Brian Giles? Who could we get for even like secondary guys, Chris Benson, Oliver Perez? That was part of some of my original thinking. Sure. And now it's transformed into trying to just be as knowledgeable or at least know names, because you can't know everything about everybody. It's impossible to keep track of that. But whenever you are in such a comprehensive league where you have 20 prospects, and so some of us would probably like to have 25 or 30 or more, you just want to know who guys are.
Yeah.
So that if someone drops somebody, if you want to be able to, you want to be first or close to first with some of when it comes to waivers and things like that. So trying to keep guys in your head, maybe more so than you would have before, and thinking of it from not just like a real life perspective, but a fantasy perspective, because there's always players who are more
what's that pivot? Yeah, what's that pivot for you? Because you mentioned now a couple of times, and I agree with you. There is a difference between real life value and fantasy value for prospects, and thinking about that is important in constructing your roster. But when you're saying that, what are you specifically thinking of?
Well, because so much, depending on what it is, you have so many guys who you're thinking, the game has changed in a lot of ways, especially in the last 5-6 years. It's been power arms, power over the fence bats. And you still have your guys in general who could be maybe 300 hitters, who put the ball on pretty well. They have maybe good fundamental skills, obviously, good utility players in the long run.
Right.
But if they don't have those skills that kind of preach the upside as being a valuable fantasy contributor, maybe, lightning speed, something that looks like they can hit 30, 40 home runs a year. If their velocity now only goes to 93, although, 15 years ago, that was maybe half the hitters, and 4 years ago was probably 10%. But if your velocity only goes to 93 as opposed to, now they can pump it up to 97, 98, that makes a difference. It doesn't matter so much if you're throwing 93 and your ERA is under 3 and you're K'ing about 8 an inning, 8 per 9 now as opposed to 11 or 12. Things that can still be a serviceable pitcher, but when you're looking at ceiling for guys who can really break out, that has an impact.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that, and something that I was going to talk about later, doesn't mean that those guys can't have value, especially in a league such as this one. But when you're trying to get ahead and you're trying to find the next big thing, and a lot of people now kind of also sense that too, but there's a lot of guys who are way more valuable in maybe contributing to a team on sort of the fringes as opposed to what we're looking at, even with the huge rosters that we have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about the ABL differently than I do my other leagues in constructing my prospect roster, although I do have a tremendous amount of overlap to my leagues because there are guys that are my guys and I go get them. But in the ABL, because of our scoring system, which is head to head, you can place greater emphasis, in my opinion, on certain skill sets. So, for example, with hitters, power and speed. And I'm willing to tolerate a higher K rate in the ABL than I might be in a traditional 5x5 league that counts batting average, right?
Absolutely.
And puts a lot of role in, right? I have other leagues that have OPS as a category, right? In tandem with batting average or in lieu of batting average. So in those leagues, the strikeout rate still matters some, but less than the batting average leagues, right? But in ABL, I don't care how I get the points, right? The guy can have 3 strikeouts and hit a home run, and that's 6 points,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And, and better still if they have power and speed, right? And better still if they have power and speed and they can walk, even if they're still striking out. Right. So, if you look at my roster right now, it's littered with guys who have huge power speed upside and for the hitters. Right. And, in contrast on the pitching side, it's really about, as it should be, in my opinion, just keeping runners off base and run prevention. Right. So I'm looking for guys with like extreme command who strike guys out and have command. Right. Now, look, that's a recipe for success in any dynasty league. Right. Right.
And it's very rare to find.
Yeah, it is rare. Right. But I try to target prospects in this league that have huge upside on that K- walk ratio. And, I'm willing to have a lot of variance in those prospects on the pitching side. But when they hit, it's huge. And I just feel like you can get replacement value prospects, like a 50 grade prospect, you can find. Like, those guys are, the less interesting. I mean, the guy who may be a 45 prospect, but could be a 60 prospect, like, that's the guy I want. Because in the end of the day, when you want to make an impact on your roster at the ABL level, when you have 30 teams, those are the guys that are going to be difference makers. And I think it's compounded by the economics in our league, right? So we have a max of 5 years you can keep a player, right? And you have to, after 1 year, you have a show me year, basically. They get called up, and then the following year is a show me year where you don't have to make a contract decision on them, right? There's a little bit of inflation on their price. But after that, you got to make a call, right?
And it is not going to. And a lot of us, in a lot of ways, we're just hitting that. This is year 3.
Yeah.
And and also having those first glimpse of those prospects who debuted last year, they're in their second year now. Some of them have gotten very little playing time.
Yeah.
And some of them are still quite young, some of them are still quite old. And kind of a kind of a good example of this conundrum is a shared player that we both had, Leo Verpugero
Oh,
from
sure.
the Pirates.
Yep.
Because I think I may have had him at one point, but then he debuted for 2 games because
Yep.
Altoona and Pittsburgh are so close together, and they needed somebody within an hours of time. So he came up and he played for like 2 games, and they sent him right back to
Yep.
Double A. This was about 365 days ago. Where is he still now? Double A.
Yep.
But he burned that first year. He now he's $3 still on the first contract, but he's been playing better of late. He got off to a terrible start this year in
Yep.
Double A. Now his OPS is up close to 800 now, but he's still not even in Triple A yet. And I don't think they're going to bypass him past Triple A. It's very unlikely that if you have a player like that, that you're going to want to extend him. And if you do more than a year, it's not going to be that you're not going to feel comfortable doing that. So
Nope.
it's really tricky. A lot of these decisions are going to be really tricky. I have a few players like that. I'm sure you may have a couple of that boat where you just, because you spend so much time, you want to spend so much time developing these guys.
Yeah.
And then, and then to see like, do you take the gamble?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
we've seen some of these contracts already.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, precisely for the reasons you've identified, in rostering a lot of like decent but not high upside prospects, is being faced with this conundrum. Because if you have to make a commitment on a guy, like, sight unseen, who he really hasn't played, and Porgero is a perfect example. I'm glad you brought him up. He's a prospect that has some upside, but I wouldn't describe him as like huge upside, right? I mean, if it all comes together, he's a power and speed guy, right? Who plays in the middle of the diamond and
Right.
put up a great OPS, and that may take some time to reach, even if he ever reaches it, right? Do you extend a guy like that? I mean, he's just unextendable right now in Double A.
Yep.
And so he's going to end up getting cut, right? And the hope, he was actually cut this season. I actually put a claim in for him. I traded for him in the offseason, retraded him. He got cut. I put a claim in, lost the bid. Somebody else has him. And, the only reason I put a claim in is on the off chance he promotes, right? You wanted to say something?
Well, I traded him to you
in
the offseason for Jaden Hill and Jared Jones. And then you cut him at some point. I don't know if it was this one or elsewhere, but he got cut, and I picked him back up this year. And I cut him again because I was like, yeah, because I follow the Pirates minor leagues every day. He was OPSing under 700. He was had a terrible first month and a half, and I go, you know what? He's going to be $5 and extendable next year. Even if something happens, I'm not going to feel. Not that I've given up on him totally, but for this league, I can't do it. So then I cut him. Maybe this is whenever. I don't know if you put the bid on when I got him or you put a bid on the next time.
I don't know, but so I don't even know where he is right now. But I just because I don't have room for him, right? Because at the time I had an open slot, and when a guy gets cut and you can put a claim in, you don't have to spend $1, right? It doesn't cost you any cap money, right? So I was like, oh, this is a free move, basically. Like, I'll put a claim in for this kid. But for the reasons you said, the only reason you'd extend him is if he came up to the majors and like knock a cover off the ball, right?
Yep.
Now there are other guys like O'Neill Cruz, who I was very fortunate to inherit when I came into the league. He's actually the only player on my roster that I inherited. I've gotten rid of everybody else. Yeah, I cleaned out.
That's amazing.
So he's the one connection to the prior owner. So thank you for the prior owner, whoever that was, for giving me O'Neill Cruz.
Only thing you have to thank him for.
Right. So, but the reason I brought Cruz up was he's a guy who, there's a lot of volatility in that player. He strikes out a lot. He could struggle. I didn't know what he was going to be, and he had a mixed debut. right? He flashed
Mm-hmm.
tremendous power in his debut, last year, but struggled mightily against left-handed pitching and had all kinds of strikeout issues, right? And there's a lot of criticism. Stock kind of took a hit in the offseason. There's a lot of like dubious like views about him, but I extended him. I maxed him out, right? And the reason I did that was because that was a guy that was worth the gamble to me, right? Because the skills, the talent is so high, the ceiling is so high that like for that dude, like, yeah. And if it comes back to bite me, like I live with it, right? It's like, okay, fine, but like, so for him, I'll do it. But for a guy like Guerrero, and then like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with him, right?
Right.
We can draft him next year,
but not now. Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, right. Sure, I'll draft him for $1.
Maybe we'll both put bids on him in the
Yeah,
auction.
we'll end up bidding him up, and like, right, that's what'll happen. Like one of us will get stuck
and
with
then
him
we'll
for
trade him to each
$7.
other again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's jump into some of the topics for tonight, because this actually dovetails what we were just talking about into the first topic, which is working the middle tier of prospects. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but I was looking through your roster, and we'll talk about it more. But there's a lot of guys who I would say are not like huge upside dudes, but are kind of in the middle. You have a couple like star prospects, and we can talk about those too. But I'm interested in your views about how you've accumulated this core asset group, and what your views are, going forward with them. A topic that you wanted to talk about was pitching being king in the ABL. So I want to talk a little bit about that and how it affects your views about prospecting. And then we have the crushes and fades segment of the show, which is my favorite segment, because we talk about our, loves and hates. People who are above or below for us, above or below consensus. So with that in mind, why don't we talk about your roster a little bit and working the middle tier? Like how would you assess, Zach? How would you assess your roster and what you're trying to do within the ABL?
Sure.
And I'm talking about your minor league roster, just the minors.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it was kind of funny. I was thinking a lot about a couple episodes ago what David said, and a lot of what David said I completely agreed with about these. When you think about, no, I sound like someone on TV starting with when you think about.
You are on TV. This is live, brother. This is live in the studio audience.
Like Troy Aikman or something.
Right.
When you look at the draft picks, how often they get moved around. And he said something along the lines of, after like the first round or mid-second round or something, everything's a crapshoot. And really it's true, because I was lucky enough to have a high pick and pick Jordan Lawler from the prior year, from inheriting that spot from the prior owner and having a high pick. So that's kind of like, I guess, my prized possession, if you will. But when otherwise assessing, the waiver wire during the season is really king. And the off-season draft is for, in primary places, the newest international prospects, or for the last draft. You'll have some guys who have helium, whether from the Arizona Fall League or something,
right,
that could have, who kind of came out of nowhere. But because of the depth of this league, most of the guys who are worth being taken are going to be taken already when you get to the draft. So a lot of third, fourth, fifth rounders, I mean, you could certainly get talent there. I know everyone in this league can probably claim at least one guy who they got in the third, fourth, or fifth round who turned out to be one of their top prospects, a top 50, top 100 guy. But you really have to scour the waiver wire to find guys, and you have to beat other ones to it. And you've talked about this a lot too, because there's certain guys who are also on the prowl.
Oh yeah,
looking for guys.
There's sharks in the water in ABL, brother.
and it's come the same kind of thing. What was it? I think Justin Robleski maybe last week. He got let go, and then the Sharks were there, and then he didn't get claimed on waivers, but then like on one day 8 guys claimed him, and then somebody got him. But that comes into play. Like, I'll say, in one sense, I was able to you need to be able to do that to build your overall team, and you need to be able to be effective at that. Because I've gotten guys.
Yep, you froze.
Oh,
You froze there for a second, Zach. You've gotten
yeah,
guys, and then you cut up. Yeah,
I got the circle of doom, but I think we're back now.
you're back.
But if you're lucky and you're patient, like I've been able to claim off the waiver wire in the last couple of years, guys like Edwin Arroyo, he's highly rated prospect now. Yasser Zululeta, Brian Ramos. A lot of guys that I mean, I've traded Arroyo, I've traded Zululeta in order to try to get me to the playoffs last year. And other Edgar Cuero, guys who are top 100 prospects or close to it. If you get them early, you can either help to supplement your team by trading or help them to hopefully grow into that level. And you've got to, and that's one way to get guys who maybe still have that upside, but are quite young for their leagues. They have, they have the home run tally, they have the high stolen base tally, they have the high K tally, or the low walk tally, or in some cases both. To be able to see that when those trends start to happen and say, you know what, I need to jump on this before anyone else does. And then what you do with that talent is up to you, whether you trade them or keep them. Because as we know, trading happens all over the place here.
It does.
No
rest for the weary in the ABL.
See, the waiver wire is key for that. But also, what I've found to be at least important for me is that I definitely have a few guys who are on my minor league squad who do not project as, top 100 prospects. Guys like Jared Triolo, Dominic Fletcher for the Diamondbacks, who already had a cup of coffee. Maybe Landon Raup for the Giants, a pitcher. I picked up, he was sitting for a while, former top first-round pick Jackson Rutledge for the Nationals.
Sure.
Most of these guys are probably still top 500 or maybe in the 400 range. But I think it's good to have balance overall, position-wise, talent-wise, and even age-wise. Because when I'm talking about value, I think it's kind of important to have guys who are close to the big leagues and who have a chance to contribute. And that's where a lot of those guys kind of fit in. Maybe they could break out and be better than that, but I'm not really necessarily expecting that. But there's value in having a guy in AA or AAA who's not, not necessarily a 27-year-old in AA, but maybe 24, 25.
Well, Fletcher, who you brought up, is a good example of the type of player that you're describing, right? He's a guy who, isn't going to light the world on fire in terms of prospect lists, but, he's had a cup of coffee. He's 25 years old. Right now he's back down, if I'm remembering correctly, where he is, right? But, he's a guy who can provide value in the ABL, particularly because, there's nobody on the major league wire out there, unless you want a backup catcher or a relief pitcher, right? There's prime value for guys who can just play in the major leagues. And if they get any sort of regular at bats, they have value. So, a guy like Fletcher, whether he ends up being kind of a flex, player off your bench into your lineup, or if he does earn an everyday job, you can have him for a year or two, right? And that's fine, right? And there's value in that.
That's the way I look at it. Like sort of like, a real team, you need those, not I would say like AAA veterans necessarily or minor league veterans to like fill out your roster. You need guys who still have big league upside, maybe not top 100 upside, but big league upside, who, the way I look at it is you don't want to necessarily see like, I need to get all these young guys who have all the skills in the world, but they're all really far away.
You're describing my roster. But we can get to that. I'm the king of 17-year-olds.
And there's a lot of good value potentially with that too. And that is by no means I guess a faulty strategy, but it seemed like I feel like the way my team's constructed, I don't have a lot of I didn't get a whole lot of high upside talent. A lot of my high upside talent that I was sort of given that I inherited was Julio Rodriguez,
Uh-huh.
who was like $40 now, and Kalenic, who fell off the face of the earth for a while. It was too expensive.
Right. Because that first prospect draft that neither one of us were involved with, it was actually the first draft.
Mm-hmm.
People paid insane prices for certain prospects, and I think if I remember correctly, Kalanick was like $29 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And ABL has a $260 roster, so as soon as he gets called up to the majors, he's got to be worth $29, which he clearly was not. And he's still not worth $29, right? So,
nope.
So you got kind of
probably has been.
Right.
So I felt like I needed to accumulate a few guys who could be, because I definitely want younger. And actually, when it's kind of funny when you look at, I do have a lot of pretty young hitters across the board, but I have a couple. It's either like they're really young or pretty young, or they're on the older side. I don't really have any kind of medium level on the hitting side. And for pitchers, almost everybody's like 23.
Yep. I noticed that. Yeah. So you have like a real like either college emphasis or just kind of more mature pitchers who's like maybe past single A ball.
Right. And it's tricky because, and I know we'll get into pitching a little bit later, but pitching, I think it's where you really, really have to see for the pop-ups. And the thing is, the pop-ups can be flashes in the pan, excuse the cliche, or they can really mean something.
Yep.
And like I mentioned, Landon Raup, he's a good example. It's very unlikely that he's going to be anything better than a 4 or 5 starter in the big leagues, maybe a bullpen guy. But last year he came up, he was kind of old for his level in high A, but he walked nobody and he struck out more than a batter an inning.
Yep. Which counts.
That. And you're thinking, you know what? That could be a guy who rises quickly and carves out a niche, carves out a role. And in this league, especially on the pitching side, that is crucial to do that. So I'm willing to, I guess, to try to find value wherever I can, and how little of it I can, and I try to balance out like shooting for the stars with higher floor players as well.
Got it. That's interesting. So this is what I enjoy about having people on the show and talking about prospecting, because there's no one way to do it. I have a very different approach with my prospects. But I like hearing about this because it's just interesting to me to see how other people think about it. And there's certainly logic behind everything you're saying. And it makes sense to me and I get it. I'm much more of a, high skill, high volatility approach with my guys. And, my roster is a reflection of that in ABL. I'm like the king of the J15s. So, but I also,
did you pick Christian Hernandez second the first year or the second year?
I traded up for him and picked him, I think, third. I think I traded with Josh, I think, with the third pick in that draft, if I remember correctly. And I have since traded Christian Hernandez.
I know you mentioned that. You mentioned that you traded him, but I was like, I felt like you picked him pretty high that one year.
No, I traded up and got him. So he was a guy I still really like, although he's obviously struggled and hasn't lived up to that level of billing yet. Although I still like him quite a bit. But he was a guy I was able to monetize and trade. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think I traded him for Cedric Mullins, along with some other prospects in this league, which is obviously a win now piece. Mullins is on a very attractive contract in the league. He's on a 5-year deal, and it's not a crazy price. So
that's worth a lot. That's definitely worth a lot. That is definitely worth a lot.
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly the deal, but I think it was Christian Hernandez and Yaquil Fernandez, for Mullins. So it was a big trade.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
and both those prospects, have a lot of upside. But before we like move on to pitching, there's one guy on your minor league roster that I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about because A has a great name, and B he's kind of an interesting guy because he's sort of like a potential diamond in the rough. And it is the immortal Albie Ortiz, the first baseman for the Texas Rangers, who is 6 feet 230. Which is a
Yep.
big boy. So tell me
Yes.
about what attracted you to him. And for those who haven't seen Albie Melek's stats, he has like a 600 slugging percentage right now, and he's done it both at I believe single A and now high A. He got promoted recently. And
Yep.
he has a combined 15 home runs between those two levels. And he's kind of like one of these classic first baseman prospects. He has to really hit to make it to the majors. But you know what? Right now, he's really hitting. So tell me about
Yep.
Albie Melek.
Well, honestly, it was a guy who I've seen in a couple of the lists that I look at. And I guess one thing I guess I should mention too is I know we talk about where to look and everything, and it's I guess you can call me like the Pittsburgh Pirates of it. I'm like the bargain bin shopper. Like I have a page for like Baseball America or Baseball Prospectus or a couple other places, but I look in a lot of places, and there's definitely some cheaper free options out there.
There
But
are.
but Abby Melek came up just in the last couple weeks because he was hitting as on some hot lists, and I've and I don't want to say I've soured on the traditional power hitting first base prospect, but there's been a lot of high level, like, college high producing guys, and they're not busts yet. They're not done for yet, but there's a lot of guys who have come up. I guess
You
I
mean
should
like
say
Torkelson?
like Torkelson, Vaughn, and
How about the immortal Matt Mervis?
Mervis was like he was in like sort of like my potential fades list for later, but these guys, they hit a ton, and it's tough because a few years ago I feel like every first like under either whether it was a high level prospect or an under appreciated prospect, they would come up and they would all hit. Like Alonso came out of nowhere. Alonso came up and hit. Hoskins came up and hit. And Mancini came up and hit. And it was kind of like, okay, these first basemen, like they're on a roll here. And now it seems like everyone is sort of down in the dumps a little bit. Even like Vinny P came up and didn't light the world on fire. Cassis is not lighting the world on fire. I wouldn't give up on any of these guys by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of make me go, how much do I want to invest in at least one of those kind of guys? And then, but this was a guy who I admittedly never heard of, 30, 40 days ago.
Yeah, but the acquisition cost was negligible.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You took him off the wire. So did you claim him or did you pay for him?
I'm pretty sure I claimed him because somebody had him, and I was wondering because I was like, oh, this? I know he's not on any like the MLB.com Rangers list. He wasn't even in the top 30. I know they don't update it regularly, but he wasn't even there.
Although they just did. They just did. They just did. You could check again. You could check again to see if he made it.
But he was popping up on like 300, 400 level, and looking at the stats, he's not striking out a ton. He's walking a fair bit, and he's got the power, and he's only 21, I believe, in high A.
21 in high A ball, which is okay. That's fine.
Definitely more than appropriate. Yep.
Yeah.
And when you see all that, and you go, I didn't have a first baseman prospect on my roster. Not that I don't necessarily care all about positional flexibility with that, but it's you don't want to necessarily have like 10 of one position if you can help it. But I'm thinking he's out there. I could have a spot open. Let's give it a go. And I thought for sure I'd lose out on it because I don't think I was very high up on the waiver wire because I thought someone else would have seen him, and there he was. So I've only had him for about a week or less, but But
We'll see what he does, right? I think the
yep.
thing about these first base prospects is exactly what you said, Zach. They're just, there's a lot of volatility. They really have to hit to make the majors because other good hitters can get moved to first base. And you see that all the
Hmm.
time, right? So there's a
Absolutely.
lot of
Yep.
competition for the defensive position because there's not a lot of emphasis placed on defense at that position.
Hmm.
And that's where they basically stick a lot of guys who don't field well at the major league
Hmm.
level. And which is not to say there aren't good fielders out there at first base. Obviously there are, but it's not unusual to see that happen. And so there's real competition. And I think the question for so many of these guys is whether they can hit upper level pitching, right? Can they
Hmm.
really hit breaking balls? Can they really hit upper level fastballs? And that's where a lot of guys get exposed. And I think that's what you're starting to see with, guys like Cassis, maybe some other
Hmm.
players. I think Vinny P is actually going to be fine. He was
I,
clearly playing hurt
I
for
think
most of this year,
right.
right?
Yeah.
He's
And
got
even
big
saw
bat speed.
Prado come up and fail pretty badly
Yep.
last year, and he's bounced back pretty well this
Yeah.
year.
He's
No,
having a solid rebound. Yep.
Nolan Jones, and Kirilloff. Some
Yep.
guys, and not that they're definitely bona fide MLB players yet, but a couple of these guys have come up, got their cup of coffee, didn't really do too well, and
Yep.
now they're coming back and showing that a little bit that they can hit a little bit. But then you see, like, oh man, like I have Torkelson in a couple of my other leagues, and I'm thinking, what
He's
the heck
struggling,
happened?
man.
What in the world? I think anyone would have loved to have, like, if someone you thought was going to hit, you know,
He's been a
and
disappointment.
it's just it's just not happening. I mean, the whole Tigers lineup is
Yeah.
like, for a couple years now, it's been like a complete, I don't know, a little league team, but
It's a disaster right now. It's a disaster. There's no way around that.
no,
When
no.
Akil Baddoo is your best player on offense, they lost Riley Green, which hurts too. But
Yeah, and he was starting to hit. He was starting
yeah,
to do pretty well. It's like, and Carpenter's hitting for them too. But
yeah,
I feel like Javi Baez's OPS has been like under 600 for about 15 months.
yeah. I think Javi Baez is an interesting guy. I think his plate approach finally caught up with him. Right. I mean, for
Yep.
years he was getting away with being just a really undisciplined hitter because he had such tremendous bat speed and athleticism, and now he's finally he's hit the point where you actually do have to learn to hit.
Yes.
It
Yes.
turns out you have to learn to hit. But listen, before we forget to do it, let's get to pitching because I do want to
Sure.
reserve some time for pitching. So I titled this part of this segment, the show, "Pitching is King," which in the ABL is especially true. So tell me about your philosophy and why you wanted to bring this up during the show.
Yeah. I was curious when thinking about this because I'd done a little looking a few weeks ago. I didn't get to look today. I wanted to look today as well. But right now, I'm pretty sure in my minor leagues, I have a couple guys who've debuted, who are on my big league roster or in my prospect list who do have some major league time. But in my minor league slots right now, I have 10 hitters and 10 pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
I believe last time, I know after we arranged this, I was looking and I was looking at the roster construction of prospects. And at the time, I believe that there were only maybe 3 or 4 teams that had 10 pitchers, pitching prospects. There was one team that had 13 or 14, and I don't remember who it was. But almost and then me and a couple other guys had 10.
Yep.
And then there were only a few with 9. And there are many teams that are like 6, 5, 4.
Yeah.
Pitching
A lot of
prospects.
guys are scared of pitching prospects. We've had people on the show talk about how they really avoid pitchers because of the volatility, the injury risk, and you end up paying for them, right? In the draft. Yeah, right. Because you got to get them somehow. I think right now I have 5 guys on my minor league roster. Although I just had graduations. I had AJ Smith, Sharver, Yuri Perez, and Mason Miller came up. So I had 8.
And those are 3 pretty good ones too.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy with the 3 of them. But although Miller's obviously on the IL right now, but I think you're right that there is an opportunity, particularly given the value of pitching in the draft in this league, of having cheap, leverageable guys. And what I mean by leverageable, guys you can extend on the cheap, right? And so particularly if the timing works out, that you get a real look at them. Like, for example, Yuri Perez now, right?
Max.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Beyond
like,
max.
and I get a
Is there
free,
an infinity
I
max?
get a free year next year, right? It's $3. I'm like, this is great. By the time I make that contract decision, like, he may win a Cy Young. I mean, like, I don't know what's gonna happen with this kid, right? So that, yeah, he's getting the max contract. And I got to see AJ Smith-Shawver come up and pitch a little bit. He went through 3 levels this year, right? He's 20 years old. He went from high A, double A, triple A, and then the major. Well, he skipped triple A. He went right to the majors. So now he's going to go back down and get some seasoning. But it'll be interesting to see if he's more of like a Peguero who get a call up, and I have to make a tough decision on, because if he doesn't come back up next year, what do I do with him? But hopefully, because he pitched in the majors already, he did all right. He got lit up in his last start. Maybe he did all right. He comes back up, pitches the full, at least half a season or something like that, and then I can make a reasonable decision on. But you're right that there's value in rostering some of these pitchers, particularly if you're at the expense of, let's say, 50 grade hitters, right? Because if you can take a lottery ticket on a couple pitchers, particularly dudes that, like Rupp you were describing earlier, right? Who you just saw was like off to, a good start with his ratios, K minus walk, his command ratios, roster him and see if he gets called up, because if he becomes a cheap starter, even if he's a 4 in this league, that has value, right? I mean, I think you have don't you have like 900 pitchers on the IL right now in the league?
Let's see.
you have some obscene number of IL pitchers, if I remember correctly.
I did have I willingly traded for Bubic when he was already out for the year. So I can't claim that one, but I had Marquez go down with TJ. I signed Mize prior to last season to a max contract, and then he pitched 2 games.
That hurts.
But he's throwing now, so he's might be back before the end of the season. So, and then Urias went down, and I'm 4-11 since Urias went down. So
he's coming back. I think he just started throwing.
Likely the end of he had a rehab start, so likely.
Yeah. I saw a blurb. I don't have any shares of him in my leagues, but I saw a little blurb, across Twitter or something that he was having a rehab start.
So I definitely need that back. And then I traded for Syndergaard. He got 1 start and then he got hurt. So I have 5 starters on the DL, and even when my guy's getting openers, Brebbia from the Giants, he got hurt.
Right. Yeah, I see. That's why I'm looking at your roster right now. You've got like this just ton of pitchers that are hurt, which is in some way a poster child for why people avoid pitchers, I guess. But
and I feel like, and maybe I'm just when seeing that, because I've kind of thought about this. Even one of my other dynasty leagues, I've always kind of liked to kind of acquire or hoard pitching prospects, knowing full well that there could very well get a lot of injuries in there, no matter or guys who fall off the map. My first big trade, whenever I took over the team my first year, I had Altuve, was like the one good holdover player that I had, and I dealt him for Peguero to Joe for the Dodgers, and Cole Winn. And then Cole Winn, he did pretty well the rest of that season, and he was a top 100 prospect. He went to AAA, and he didn't have that good of a year. He had a pretty bad year last year.
He struggled in AAA.
And now he comes back to AAA again. He's still only like 23.
Yep.
He's walking almost as many innings as he's walked almost as much as he struck out, which is in about as many innings as he's pitched, and his ERA is in the 8. So I'm like, I had less confidence in him than all my other guys, and I said I traded a big asset for him. He's a former top 100 prospect, but you know what? I got to let you go. And someone did pick him up, and he could turn around. He's 23. He's not 33, but you got to know when to let go. And if you lose and you miss, then it happens. But
that's right.
But I've
traded Ellie De La Cruz in multiple leagues, so I know all about missing.
But sometimes you want to strike when the iron is hot. Whenever you got to for trades too.
That's true.
But
that's very true.
But I think part of the reason when because of the way the injuries work out, and if it killed me. Like last year, I got off to a good start. I had some pitching injuries, and then I was trying to trade for everyone that I could, and that's how I got Herman Marquez. And then he was good, and then he was fine, and I traded for Waka in the offseason, and now everyone's hurt except for Kyle Freeland and Michael Waka, and I picked up Osvaldo Bido.
There you go.
So
that's the makings of a Cy Young staff right there. That's like the Atlanta Braves in the '90s. I mean, that's awesome, dude.
That's my 3 starters.
Yeah,
Ryan Weathers got demoted, so he's technically in my minors now. Cole Reagan's got demoted, so because of the volatility, that makes me feel like it's even more important. In just as you said, the cost, the ability to try to extend guys and hit on guys who could be like that Spencer Strider, who could be that Yuri Perez. Who, not that you're expecting all of your guys to come up and be a top 5 or 10 pitcher in the league, but if you spread the wealth and you get a lot of these guys that have talent and have some pedigree, or that if they don't have the pedigree that they're producing, then you are going to hit on some and you're going to lose on some. But to me, it's really, I think it's a huge potential value in order to have as many pitchers as you can who could be cheap and could be useful for that. Whether it's starting, mostly starting. I mean, the relievers certainly have some value too. But
sure. It's interesting. The one thing I would add to your point is just the acquisition cost to me on pitching is so important. And I get most of my pitchers off the wire. Where it's a costless transaction. I think the harder pill to swallow for me is actually trading for them. So for example, you described the Cole Winn trade that you had with Joe and giving up Altuve, and you got Guerrero back in that deal too. Now it turns out, in retrospect, neither of those guys worked out for you, right? But there's a difference in a guy like Cole Winn versus a dude like, pick a guy like, Yuri Perez is a bad example because he's been so good. But, let's take AJ Smith-Shawver, for example, right? Who I drafted like late, in the draft. I think it was like a 4th round pick, maybe a 3rd round pick, whatever it was, right? But, an even better example are guys off the wire. Like I have this guy right now, McCulloch, who's a Cub, who, I don't know I didn't know him from a hole in the wall to start the season, but I've been monitoring him and picked him up for $1, and he's got this ridiculous swing and miss ratio. He gets a 16.4 swing and miss rate.
That's huge. That is,
and I'm like, okay, like I don't know who you are. I can see you're a Cub, and his name is Brody. I like the name Brody, so I picked him up, and he's got like a 29 K minus walks percentage. So I'm like, okay, like he's 23, like he's age appropriate for his level. If he comes up to the majors and does well, great. Maybe I can trade him, but it's $1. Right. And so would I much rather like have a guy like that than have to pay through the nose for a prospect, on the pitching side? I probably would, just because of the risk with pitchers. And that's how I mitigate the risk, is by trying to identify them off the wire rather than like taking a known commodity like a prospect that everybody loves and you trade for. And, you could end up chasing that dragon for years. Like, Ronci Contreras is a good example. Who I like quite a bit as a prospect, but he's obviously struggling mightily with his command and trying to get his stuff together. And we'll see. I mean, he may be in a couple of years like Mitch Keller is now, right? And Mitch Keller's obviously kind of having a turnaround season for him. But those types of guys, when they were prospects, you would really have to pay to acquire them if you didn't get them in the draft. And if you got them in the draft, they were high draft picks. Right. And so there's a real sunk cost with them and an expensive acquisition cost. Whereas, Yuri Perez is a guy I picked off the wire in every league I'm in, except for this one. I traded for him in this league. I traded him for a Gonsolin, $12 Gonsolin in this league.
That's not too shabby on either part. No,
it was a good trade. But our colleague in Detroit is not happy about the trade now. So, but I won't rub it in too bad. All All right, so let's talk about crushes and fades. So I'm interested to hear who your crushes are, or if you want to start with your fades, you can. But
No.
these are basically players that maybe you're higher on or lower on than consensus.
So it's kind of funny. I had two initial crushes in mind, and then, like I said, MLB Top 100 just updated from Callis and Mayo, and the first two like pitchers I was thinking of, they were guys who were on the lower, they were top 10 in their respective organizations, but they've gotten off to very good starts, and I'm biased on one of those cases. But now, and just in the last day, both of them ended up 99 and 100 on the top 100 prospect list. And they're both lefties. I don't know. I'm a righty. I don't know why, but I'm kind of a sucker for left-handed pitching. Anthony Solometo for the Pirates and Carson Wisenhunt for the Giants have both been. Their numbers are very good. They're very age appropriate. I mean, Solometo is only 20 years old, and he just got promoted to Double-A, and he's had two very good Double-A starts.
Yeah, and by the way, that's something that you mentioned a bunch of times, is age appropriate and being younger than the league average, and it's something we've talked about on the show a number of times with different owners. And I think it's always worth reemphasizing that it's such a good benchmark for evaluating a prospect if they're younger than the age they're competing at, and then if they're having success at that level, right? And also, even if they're struggling, if they're younger than the competition, I think you can kind of take the struggling with a grain of salt. It's like, all right, well, they're playing against older guys. And when you're that young, it makes a real difference physically, right? Whereas as opposed to grown men, people are like, in their mid-20s at that point, the age doesn't matter as much. But here, so I just wanted to reemphasize that point because I think it is so important. But go ahead, I interrupted your flow.
No.
Absolutely.
No, it's tricky though too, because it doesn't mean that guys who are older on an age level, that doesn't mean they can't be successful or that they can't turn into good players or be useful. But when you're really looking for those either breakout guys or guys who are ready to explode or have higher ceilings, that's definitely what you want to see. But I couldn't help but crack up that I was going to mention both of those two guys, and they just showed up in 99 100, where I hadn't really seen them as top 100 guys anywhere yet. Probably top 200, but not top 100. And now,
but you know what, brother? They were crushes for you, and they're on your roster now, right? So
I at least got one. I do.
That's right. I don't have reason that, but I don't know who has them if you don't have them. But I mean,
but something about and the thing is that but lefties, it's almost sort of like that power hitter. You never really know with lefties because sometimes they, like I have Waldachuk on my team, and I got him in a deal last year with Adam for Arenado. And I was like, he's really going to be helpful for me, and it's not turned out that way so far. So you still have to be a little wary.
I think you just described every pitcher, regardless of
touche.
Yeah, right. I mean, pitching it's really hard to pitch in the major leagues. I think it's hard to hit too, but to be an effective starting pitcher, it's a real refined skill. Which is, I know I keep bringing up Yuri Perez, but I just love the kid. And when you watch him pitch, he pitches so much older than he is. Just watching him just destroy major league lineups, it's so much fun. And that's just special. But I think other guys can get to that level, and it just takes a little bit longer. I mean, Garrett Cole, another Bucks prospect, right? Who's now obviously turned into an ace, and is now in New York. But it took him a few years, right? Right, and maybe Mitch Keller's that guy this year, who's really turned it around. I mean, I'm not putting him in the Garrett Cole class just yet. But he's having a nice season, right?
And you were in on Perez. You've been in on Perez for a while.
I got him. I went back and looked to the first time I added him, which was in April of, I think, 2021.
Okay,
was the first time I added. I had guys that have 0% rosters a lot of times, and they don't all work out. And I'm going to talk about a guy at the end of the show that I added in all my leagues who fit to spill. But that's a zero acquisition cost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's what you gotta do sometimes. And there's,
Yeah.
and again, none of us are gonna be 100% at hitting with this. And if we did, we'd be Duke. But I don't know, if we did, then we would
Oh,
be,
no show would be remiss if we didn't. We would not be doing our job if we did not mention The Godfather. I'm glad we got a Duke reference. That's like Star Wars, and somebody's saying like, I got a bad feeling about this. Like, here it's like, oh, Duke, right? We've now gotten that out of the way. Good. This Duke sponsorship was brought to you by Zach. All right, good. All right, so who are your fades? Who are your fades?
so, to some degree, I was gonna say, it's not necessarily fair to Matt Mervis that he came up and struggled. Mervis Cassis, to kind of go in that first, that first base bubble, but it's not. It wasn't exactly promising to see him come up, especially with how much fanfare he got, and to be like, oh, is there really something there once he came up to see the big leagues for the first time, and to have that much trouble. But he's already had some big league time, and that was the first name that came to mind when talking about this. But a couple of other guys, like, it was kind of funny, and not to mention Duke again, but I think he mentioned a little while ago about Jackson Churio, and that's not really a huge fade for me, but I kind of agree to the sentiment that everyone wanted to dub him the next Wander Franco.
Yeah.
Because he hit so well at such a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Except Franco kept hitting. And Churio has had by no stretch. Like, he's been okay, and he's gotten a little bit better lately too.
Yeah.
But he hit a little bit of a wall. And to the degree where, like, I don't know that I do have him in another league, but I don't necessarily know that I want to say that he's the third best prospect in baseball or two. And another guy I mentioned was Edwin Arroyo, who in some places is still a top like 30, 40 prospect. It is a caveat. He's only 19. He is very young, and he's in high A. But since he's been traded to the Reds, he hasn't really hit it all. And that doesn't, he did and again, he wasn't that well regarded, at least in the fantasy community, that I was able to get him off the wire. He wasn't even in the minor league draft, even though he was a second round pick. So, but he's coming to the Reds, and he just hasn't produced at that blistering level he did in Seattle. That doesn't mean that he's toast, but I'm surprised he hasn't fallen in so many several leagues, especially now when it doesn't necessarily matter what organization you're in, but when you're in Cincinnati and you have McLean and De La Cruz and Spencer Steer and
well, they can't even get playing time for Marte, right?
Marte, yes. I think he just got promoted to AAA too, I believe, just a day or two ago.
All right, I missed that, but he's another guy who's in that system who I'm not sure where he's going to play, right?
Right. So if you're not hitting, even though you're very far away, and you could very easily turn it around, but he went from like way off the grid, shot up to top 50, and now he stalled out a little bit. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Ronnie Mauricio.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe, even though he's bouncing back a little bit, but like Gabriel Arias, like some of these guys who they pop up, they have certainly some kind of skill, but they don't have an extended tradition of hitting. You have one good season, you have one good half season that gets you everyone excited. And then you're kind of like, so that's probably kind of the biggest couple for me. I think I had one more, but I don't remember.
That's all right. Well, you actually just touched on something that's important to me, and I've said this a lot in this Discord chat, and I tell this to people when I'm in trade discussions with them. That I don't believe in lists. Like, I don't pay any attention to lists, right? Yep. And I don't care where somebody's ranked. Because when people in a trade discussion with me say, "Well, he's a top 10 prospect," I'm like, I don't care. Like, what
that's a great mindset to have.
I'm interested in skills. right? And they're and scouting grades on players and what I think they're going to be as a fantasy asset. And I think that the trap of lists, a guy like Arroyo that you're describing, they shoot up a list, right? And they get into the top 50, and then people put this value in their head on what that player is. I think the right way to evaluate a kid like that is like, all right, this is a guy who was not highly regarded from the scouting community. Right now, he's had a year that exceeds their expectations. Let's see what the scouts say. Let's see if there's a change in his, he developed, maybe he got stronger, maybe you tap some raw power. Maybe he made a swing adjustment and, got some plate discipline, something happened. There was, some kind of change in his approach, that suggests that his hit tool is better than we thought it was. But if you don't see those changes, you don't see those scouting grades, like, what it could be is that regression is coming.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then there's this stickiness to the lists because people get wedded to them, particularly the people who make the lists. They don't like to admit that they're wrong, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So you'll get guys who are like, oh, Matt Mervis is a top 50 prospect. And then you're like, maybe he can't hit lefties. Why don't we pump the brakes, right? Yeah. Mervis is a guy, by the way, who I picked up in every league I was in and then traded him because then that was the entire purpose of picking him up was to deal him. Because he was getting so much hype. I got in early, waited for the home runs to accumulate, and then traded him because I didn't believe in the scouting grades. I was like, nope.
And that was smart. And then
that one turned out to be. I've been burned by that approach too. Yeah, I mean, right so far. I mean, I'm happy with the acquisitions I made, but I think it is an important point to think about lists with at least some skepticism. And just be mindful of the fact that people can get kind of hyped up there, and it doesn't mean there's actually value there for where they're being, ranked. So that's my soapbox for the moment. I hate lists.
It's a great point because, and some people are almost not that, of course, it's some people's livelihoods in some ways, and they don't want to admit that, just like you said, they want to admit that they're wrong, but also, there's guys who, I feel like Forrest Whitley ended up on top 100 list for years.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he got this injury and he got this suspension, but he hadn't actually done anything, and he was still high up on lists. So, yeah. I mean, but
here's a newsflash: he's not a major league player. How about that? Turns out.
But it is tricky, especially when you see different outlets, ones who weigh potential versus production differently, who ceiling versus floor. Yep. It is really interesting to see that. And lists are certainly fun, and we like them because they're easy to go to, and well, you can attach a number, it attaches a value to you in some way. Heck, I mean, your list that you created in a year was absolutely incredible. And
ABL handbook.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. But just like you said, it's a snapshot in time.
That's right.
It is amazing to see lists from 10 years ago and to see guys who are at the bottom of lists rise to the top, and the guys who are at the top don't even get a debut. And that's just the way that it is. And that's what makes it so addicting and fun and crazy. And
no, I mean, look, that's why we all do it, right? That's why we do Dynasty, and it does make it fun. And as you said at the top of the show, there's an element of crapshoot to it, right? I mean, it's just some of the guys that the community was really high on. Andrew Benintendi is a guy that people were really high on, and he just has never put it together at the major league level. He's a solid ball player. He has value, but he's not the number one guy in his generation, right? And other guys that come out of nowhere, end up, being really good. Sometimes they're Hall of Famers. I mean, they're guys who are well regarded, but weren't hyped in the way. Like Albert Pujols was not hyped as being the man.
That was the first guy I thought of when you started bringing that up.
Yeah, I was like, oh, Albert. So it happens. And then there are guys like Wander Franco who, that was a guy that I believed in because of his hit tool. There are very few guys who get an 80 grade hit tool in multiple top-notch scouting communities. That's incredible. And he's showing it now. He's a terrific ball player.
Right. Is he the number one player in the league? No. But is he is he still producing it? And you're like, how young he still is, how young Soto still is. Some of these
Oh
guys.
yeah, these guys. We are privileged to be in a generation now where we have a lot of really exciting young ball players. Right, they're
Mm-hmm.
all up, and it's going to be fun. And we were talking before the show started about the NL Central. Right, I mean, how fun is it going to be to have Jordan Walker, Odell Cruz, Ellie De La Cruz in this division for
Yeah.
however long they're in the division? Right, I mean, hopefully they're all locked up long term, but that's just terrific. That's terrific for baseball.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be. And Matt Mervis, no.
And Matt Mervis, right? Matt Mervis, right?
Although
Or the
they have
poor
their
Cubs, right?
Pete Crow Armstrong's doing pretty well for himself
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So
That's the next hope for them, and maybe Christian Hernandez. You never know.
absolutely.
So
But
let me talk about.
I was
Go
like, I
ahead.
believe you did mention that you had a
Oh yes,
crush that you wanted to mention, a mid-season pop-up crush, if you will.
yeah. And so I added this guy in ABL on May 13th this year for $1. And I now own him in every single dynasty league I'm in, which is why I'm willing to talk about him because I have him now.
He's all mine. No one
he's
else
all
can have
mine.
him.
His name is Jose Urbina. He is a 17-year-old pitcher for the Rays. He's from Venezuela. He was a J15. And a couple interesting things to note. He went from age 16, where he was throwing 90, to being throwing 97 right now at age 17. He has a curveball and a changeup, both of which he commands well. And his fastball has movement. It's not straight. And the key for him is that the Tampa Bay Rays, who are an organization that I really respect, for the 17-year-old pitcher coming out of Venezuela, skipped the DSL and put him in the CPX. All right.
That's rare across the board.
Yeah.
But let alone when you have a team that has such success developing players overall, that is a good sign.
That is a good sign. So he's one of those guys I added that had 0 roster ratings. Like put a flag on this guy. Like he is my hope for Yuri Perez 2.0. Is right there. Right.
So,
he's 6'3", 180, and he throws 97 at age 17. Like that's the guy I'm watching. But then the acquisition cost was so low in all my leagues that I just who cares if it works out? Like it's brilliant, and if it doesn't, like okay. I mean, I could be wrong, but he's my crush.
He's not going to be on your trade zone probably for a couple years at least. You're probably at least going to wait that out.
Oh yeah, no. Particularly if he has the ratios, if that strikeout rate goes up, and I see the command there, like he's not going anywhere. I mean, Yuri was like basically untouchable in my minors after I acquired him. Like I got lots of questions about Yuri. I was like, he's not going anywhere. I was like, yeah. I had a funny conversation with Joe. He was talking about trading for Yuri Perez, and he offered me Nolan Gorman for him, and he was like saying they're like ranked about the same. This is nothing but lists, right? And I was like, Joe, like I don't believe in lists, but if you want to talk about lists, like actually Jordan Walker's ranked 6 on the Baseball America, and Yuri's 7. So if you want to talk about that trade, we can have a conversation. But
maybe I'll consider that one. Gorman's no slouch, but still.
Fine. He's fine. I was like, don't quote me lists, particularly when you're not being fair about the quote. Honestly, like I can read. But anyway,
But do you think because do you have guys who and this is tricky? You've definitely mentioned that you've picked up a lot of guys and you've traded them.
Yeah,
guys who are big leaguers and guys who are still high prospects who are close to the bigs. But do you sort of have a couple, not that you have to say who they are, and we know Perez is probably in that boat, but do you attach yourself to a couple guys and you're like, you know what, I'm not trading this guy no matter what. Like I like this guy too much, whether it's on a fantasy perspective or just like a personal perspective. You're like, I'm not doing
my thought about that. Yeah, I look at it slightly differently. Like there's nobody on any of my teams that's untouchable, ever. Mm-hmm. Right? But as a practical matter, like, I can't really move the player, right? Because the lost opportunity cost is just too huge. Like a guy like Yuri Perez, like what are you going to offer me? Like that is going to make it worth an ABL trading a guy who's $1, who I can keep functionally for 6 years at under $20, and frankly under like $17, right? Because he's going to get a max contract, and if he continues to pitch the way he is, I mean, that's insane value.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, who are you going to give me? Corbin Carroll? I mean, like, I mean, you're
Right.
talking about like, you know,
I,
that level of a trade, and it's just like, you know, I don't want 5 players for him because
right.
he's more valuable than those 5 players. That's, you know,
Because that's like we all love the ABL so much because of how much, we can't completely, of course, emulate the big leagues with this, but it comes as close as to any of us can imagine. But so often, especially in the last 5-7 years in real baseball, they talk about, oh, this prospect's untouchable.
yeah,
How it's been so rare in the last 5 to 7, 8 years to have a prospect who is rated among the top 10 or 20 in the game get moved in a deal in an
yeah,
untouchable sense. In the ABL, almost nobody's untouchable in the prospect sense. Although
no,
I admit, like I'm not looking for trading Lawler anytime soon,
yeah,
but a lot of people deal those top guys
yeah,
for
no,
on a whim, and so
yeah.
untouchable is not really a thing here.
It's not, and I place more value on cheap players. Like, you know, when I say cheap, I mean just, you know, low acquisition cost guys and guys who are going to be not hitting my salary cap hard. Because I think, you know, the owners are in the league are starting to pick up on the fact that the $260 cap is a real issue if you
Mm-hmm.
have these expensive contracts going into the year. And some of us are better than others in terms of managing money and, you know, budgets, but, you know, all these young prospects who are a dollar, you know,
Yep.
just have tremendous value if they hit.
Yep.
You know, that's why we talk prospects and do this stuff, and you know, it's a lot of fun. But you know, yeah, Yuri and I are pretty much joined at the hip, and like, you know, don't worry, everybody, you can bid on him in like, you know, 7 years in the auction.
get, get, get,
So,
get,
you
get
know,
that
and
get that ready
you
to
can
go
bid against me, you know,
because you
uh,
still might be the high bidder then because
right?
you're going to
I'll
clear
have
that
the
cap
money.
room.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, Zach, it was loads of fun having you on the show. I could talk baseball all night, as I'm sure you
Ditto.
could
Yeah.
too. But you know, we'll have you on again sometime soon, and we can maybe revisit your crushes and fades to see how things play out. But for everybody else watching live or at home or in a day or two, remember to ABP, always be prospecting.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Steve.